To get more on all this now from Senator Bernie Sanders, joining us in his first Sunday interview since leaving the presidential race. Senator Sanders, thanks for joining us this morning. And I do want to get to that, but let's begin with where we just left off with Peter Navarro, the president's firing on Friday of the State Department Inspector General Steve Linick. Now the fourth Inspector General fired in several weeks. You heard what Mr. Navarro said. He said he's worried about the deep state. The president deserves to have people loyal to his agenda.
Look, this president thinks he's above the law. He's above criticism. He wants to get away with anything that he can. And he does not understand that in the function of government, you have a Congress, you have inspector generals who say, by the way, Mr. President, what you're doing is wrong and it may be illegal. This has been his modus operandi from day one.
Let's talk about the economic stimulus package that was passed by the House on Friday. It's the basis for negotiations with the Senate. We've heard those Senate Republican leaders don't seem to be in any rush to pass anything. If this came to the Senate floor, would you vote for it?
I would vote for a very substantive piece of legislation, and it really amazes me. Mr. Navarro talks about how the Republican Party is worried about the working class of this country. Well, you know what, Mr. Navarro? In the last 2 months, 35 million people have lost their jobs. There are millions of people today who are hungry in America. They don't have any food in their cupboards. There are people today who cannot afford to go to a doctor even when they have coronavirus symptoms. There are elderly people who are sitting home alone, who are scared to death about the future. If you're concerned about the working class of this country, understand the extraordinary suffering, unprecedented, that is now taking place. Demand that Congress act. Now, I think what Pelosi did in the House, it is significant. It is important. I have some disagreements with it, and I want to see the Senate improve upon it. Among other things, I happen to believe that we should go in the direction of a paycheck security process similar to what has been done in Europe, which says to every worker in America, you will continue to receive your paycheck and the other benefits which you had when you're on the job. And when this crisis is over, hopefully sooner than later, you're just going to go back to work. I also believe that during this crisis, instead of funding the COBRA program, what we should do is make sure that all people in this country, including the 87 million who are uninsured or underinsured before the pandemic, have access to health care. And you do that by allowing Medicare to fill in the gaps for the uninsured and the underinsured. But I think Pelosi, at least unlike the Republican leadership, said, you know what? We have terrible suffering in this country. We need to get money out to the cities and towns, to the hospitals. We need to protect working people. And I would hope that the Republicans wake up and understand the severity of the crisis that we're facing and the suffering that now exists.
One of the other things we heard in Mr. Navarro's response is you see they're going to go full bore on Vice President Biden and his relationship with China over the years. The point they're saying is that President Trump has been tough on China. The Democrats, led by Joe Biden, have not.
Yeah, right. Well, look, you got a president who blames everybody in the world for the problems that we face except himself. You know, this is a guy who, used to talk about President Xi as being a great leader, a good friend of his, the leader of North Korea, who is probably the worst dictator in the world, was a wonderful human being. They wrote love letters to each other. Look, what they're trying to do now is instead of address the pandemic that we have, and I should say, George, that the scandal of the moment is that we don't have national policy. This is the president of the United States. We should have national policy based on science. We should have testing going on all over this country so that when we reopen the economy, workers understand that they're working in a safe environment. Instead, you got 50 states going it alone because we don't have that national protocol based on science. But, Trump will blame everybody for everything instead of dealing with the crises that we face. And the crises we face is reopening the economy safely based on science, not 50 states doing it alone. Crisis we face is that Congress has got to act now to address the enormous suffering and unemployment that is currently existing. And I also think, George, to tell you the truth, that if there is any silver lining in the midst of this terrible, terrible and unprecedented moment in American history in terms of the economy, in terms of the pandemic, it is that maybe we start rethinking some fundamental tenets about the way our government and society works. And we should ask ourselves, among other things, is health care a human right that all of us deserve because we're human beings, or is it simply a health care benefit that somehow we lose when we lose our jobs? You know, Mr. Navarro talked about the great economy, the beautiful economy that existed before the pandemic. Well, half of the people in America were living paycheck to paycheck. I don't think it's a beautiful economy that when paychecks stop for 2 weeks, millions and millions of people don't have enough money to buy the food that they need to feed their families. We need an economy that works for all, not just Trump and his billionaire friends. We need an economy that says we shouldn't have 3 people on top owning more wealth than the bottom half of American society. We need an economy that says healthcare is a human right like every other country, where we're not getting ripped off by the pharmaceutical industry. There's a lot to be done, and if there's anything that I hope we learn out of this horribly painful experience, is that maybe we create an economy and a government that works for all, not just a few and wealthy campaign contributors.
Let's talk about the campaign. Your former campaign manager, Jeff Weaver, put out a memo this week where he warned that Vice President Biden is falling far short with your supporters, the supporters who supported you during the primary campaign that he's going to need in November. Is he right about that? And what does the vice president have to do about it?
Look, I think at the end of the day, the vast majority of the people who voted for me, who supported me, will understand and do understand that Donald Trump is the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country. He's a pathological liar. He's a racist and a sexist, a homophobe, etc. And I think at the end of the day, they will be voting for Joe Biden. But I think what Joe is going to have to do, and he's beginning to move in that direction, is to say to those working class people, say to those young people, say to those minorities, listen, I understand your situation. You know, I understand that you are graduating college with tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars in debt. I understand that you don't have any health insurance. I understand that you're working at a job that is paying $12 an hour and you can't get by on that. We ought to raise that minimum wage to a living wage. You know, I understand that you're concerned about not only the pandemic, but you're concerned about climate change and how we make sure that the world comes together to address the existential threat and in the process create millions and millions of good paying jobs. I understand that you're concerned about the racism within our criminal justice system and our immigration system. So I think that Joe and his staff understand that. I think they are going to reach out to our supporters and come up with an agenda that speaks to the needs of working families, of young families, of minority communities.
Senator Sanders, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you.